Hey beatniks and new tricks. Silly rabbit. Coffee time. Hey everybody, my name is John and welcome to Coffee Time. Today I want to tell you all a little story about something that happened last week. So last week I spent my time at Texas Motor Speedway during the entire build and production of the festival Together Generation. Some of you may remember a few years ago they did this big Christian festival in DC where they're like, we're gonna get as many Christians in one area as possible. This was that, but 2 years later in Texas. And the reason I was there, I wasn't speaking or anything. I had actually been invited by my friend who works for the event planning company who was in charge of sort of coordinating all the vendors for the event. She asked if I wanted to bring my camera, take over social media for their company for the week, and I would get an all-access pass to this giant Christian festival. Yeah, I'll take two. So the long and the short of it is, I spent the entire week at this event. And for me, it gave me a really unique and I think valuable perspective. Because for me, normally my role at a festival like this would be as a speaker or what they would call one of the artists. But this past week, I was actually doing most of my work behind the scenes. So I showed up about 3 or 4 days before any of the artists did, and I watched as a crew of over 100 people worked in the rain and the mud and the sleet, building the stage, bringing in all the trailers, lifting up all the tents. And like I said, it gave me this really unique perspective because usually as an artist, I just show up the day of, I do my thing on the stage, and I leave. And to be honest, I never really gave much thought to the idea that before I even showed up, there had been people working for days, months even, praying and working and laying cable and setting up speakers. And being able to work behind the scenes just gave me a perspective that normally as an onstage person, I wouldn't have. It gave me the perspective of just how important and just how necessary all of that behind the scenes work is in order to do ministry. And you may have seen I posted on Instagram about this, but what is crazy to me is that we as a church, we as a Christian culture, myself included, whether we say it explicitly or not, believe that, yeah, there's all the people that do the work behind the scenes, but the real important work is the person on the stage that's preaching the gospel. And again, whether we say it explicitly or not, if you actually look at the way that we live, if you actually look at the way that many of us have organized our events and organized our churches, the onstage people are the most important people there. And like I said, this goes far beyond just Christian events. This has permeated into our churches as well, as we see that those with speaking or creative or music or any onstage gifts are usually the ones that we see being lifted up. And of course, please hear my heart. I'm not saying that this is the case at every single event or every single church. And I'm also saying that this has actually been my mindset before. Not explicitly, but subtly, deep down in my own heart, this is what I believed, and this is the way that I acted. And Sweet Bear and I, we actually talked about this recently on a podcast episode where we were talking about the church and what kinds of gifts the church celebrates and what kinds of gifts the church doesn't necessarily notice as much.
It is kind of frustrating how just because John has gifts of teaching and gifts of leadership and he's up on stage, he gets to feel more welcome and more wanted in the church body than somebody like me who has maybe quieter gifts.
And I think the reason that I have become so sort of righteously angry about this is because the way that we organize so many events or churches actually, I think, stands in direct opposition to what the Bible teaches us for what the church or the body should look like. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 4, it says, there are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one, it is the same God at work. So this means that whether you are singing on the stage or whether you set up the microphone, Whether you are preaching from a platform or whether you built the legs and stood in the mud and held that platform up so a person could preach on it, regardless of what gifts you have, the same Spirit, the same Lord, and the same God gave them to you and is working through you as you work them out. And later on in the chapter, the text talks about how these gifts should work together by using the metaphor of a body. In verse 21, it says, "The eye cannot say to the hand, 'I don't need you.' And the head cannot say to the feet, 'I don't need you.' On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem weaker are indispensable." Like the Bible literally says it. The Bible is literally saying, hey you, person who's running the soundboard. Hey you, person who's making sure that everyone has a parking spot. Hey you, person who's just welcoming someone in through the doors. You might seem weaker, you might seem disposable, but you and your gifts are actually indispensable to the work that God is doing. Give me some coffee. Oh, back to the text. It says, on the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. I'm sorry, but if you're a Christian artist, you don't just need blue M&Ms in your trailer. You don't just need a certain kind of bottled water, and you're gonna throw a fit if you don't get Evian. That's being a diva. And please hear me, I am saying this as a person who has had that mentality, that because I'm the one who's preaching the word through a microphone, that I somehow should be treated differently than everyone else at that church or at that event. But God says this, it says, God has put the body together, giving greater honor to the parts that lacked it, so that there should be no division in the body, but that its parts should have equal concern for each other. This is not a discussion over which gifts are more important. And this is also not a discussion over which gifts are underappreciated or don't get their proper due. But the picture that we receive in Scripture is those who work behind the scenes and those who work on the stage. Those who work in the lobby, in the parking lot, in the back office. All of us should be doing our part, should be working together, should be using our gifts. And that usage of our gifts, that service, should actually create unity. Cracked my knuckle there. Hey friends, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I mentioned earlier how Sweet Bear and we actually talked about this on our podcast. Some of you may not know, we have a podcast. The podcast is called The Bear and the Swan. It's a show where we just kind of get on and we talk about different topics. We've talked about the church. We've talked about dating. We've talked about travel. We talk about everything. So you can actually find that podcast anywhere podcasts are downloaded. That's Spotify, that's Apple Podcasts, that's Anchor, wherever you want to find it. It is most likely there. I encourage you to subscribe to that podcast, to leave a review if you're enjoying it. And that is all I have this week. Thank you all for watching. I love you all so much. Keep being awesome.